Othniel, son of Kenaz. Now, Othniel is going to be the first, I think, the first judge after Joshua. I think. Yep. He's going to be the first judge after Joshua, so he's going to play a big role, and he was a good judge. Othniel, son of Kenaz. Now, Kenaz is Caleb's younger brother, so they're still kind of like intermarrying. What are you going to do? So Caleb gave his daughter Akshah to him in marriage. And then we go through the same story where since she's got the Negev, which is a desert, she asks for some water, springs of water, and Caleb does it for her. Okay, that's in chapter 15. The descendants of Moses, Moses' father-in-law, the Kenite, went up from the city of palms. Okay, so now we know Moses' father-in-law was Jethro. And remember, he was a priest, a Midian priest, and he was a Kenite. So that's just what's happening in verse 16. Went up from the city of palms. The city of palms was another name for Jericho. So I guess there was a lot of palms there. With the people of Judah to live among the inhabitants of the desert of Judah in the Negev near Arad. Then the men of Judah went with their Simeonites, their fellow Israelites, and attacked the Canaanites living in Zephath, and they totally destroyed the city. Once again, they're being very obedient to God, so God is blessing them. Therefore, it was called Hormah. Now, Hormah means destruction, so they did exactly what God told them to do. God says when you come into a city in the promised land, you got to wipe out everything, and they did. Judah also took Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ekron, each city with its territory. Verse 19, we're told that the Lord was with the men of Judah because they were obedient. And because they were obedient, God granted them everything that they needed. In battle, they were successful. They took possession of the hill country, but they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had chariots fitted with honor. Now here we start seeing the shift from obedience to disobedience. Because if they would have asked God to help them fight those people with the chariots, God would have granted that. But they didn't. So we're starting to see a shift here. And from this point forward, we're going to see that the different tribes start to fail. In verse 21, the Benjamites, so the tribe of Benjamin, however, did not drive out the Jebusites who were living in Jerusalem. To this day, the Jebusites lived there with the Benjamites. Now, the Jebusites lived there until David removed them in 2 Samuel. So they were there for a long, long time. So the tribe of Benjamin failed. Verse 22, now the tribe of Joseph. And we know that the tribe of Joseph is really two tribes, right? Because it represents his sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Remember, Jacob adopted Joseph's two sons as his own. Okay, so these are actually two tribes, Manasseh and Ephraim. They attacked Bethel, and the Lord was with them. When they sent men to spy out Bethel, the spies saw a man. Tell me if this sounds familiar. The spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, "Show us how to get into the city, and we will see that you are well treated." So he showed them. They put the city to the sword, but spared the man and his whole family.
Jericho. Oh, no.
Yeah?
No, it says like Rahab.
Exactly, just like Rahab. Yeah, so whenever somebody helps God's people, they're saved. So usually God says you have to wipe out everybody, but Rahab and this guy helped out God's people, so they were allowed to live. Exactly, same story. So the two tribes of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, were temporarily obedient and temporarily successful. Verse 27, but Manasseh did not drive out the people of Bethshan or Tanakh or Dor or Iblim or Megiddo and their surrounding settlements, for the Canaanites were determined to live in that land. When Israel became strong, they oppressed the Canaanites into forced labor, but never drove them out completely. And we know that's a problem. So Manasseh failed. Benjamin failed. Manasseh failed. Verse 29. Nor did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites living in Gezer, but the Canaanites continued to live there among them. Neither did Zebulun drive out the Canaanites living in Kitron. So the Canaanites are there. Nor did Asher drive out those living in Aco. The Asherites lived among the Canaanites. Neither did Naphtali. He didn't drive out people. The Danites, the tribe from Dan, didn't drive out the Canaanites. So every tribe started to fail. And we know that's going to be a problem. Judges chapter 2.
Any
Let
questions?
me
Oh,
interrupt, Pastor.
Yep.
You know, I've read the first chapter several times and looked at maps, and I'm still so confused on everything that happened, all the places, the names, and it's just, I thought I knew a little bit about the Bible, but it's just blown my mind.
Yeah, and sometimes the city names just don't match. They might be slightly off. Was it the city names, Gary, that didn't match up, or what else?
Well, the people, the places, I don't know, it just was tough. You know, and essentially they made contracts with everybody and didn't force them out, so they failed. They didn't ask, like you said, they didn't ask for help.
No. If they only would have asked for God's help, like the tribe of Judah did, God would have helped them, but they didn't. They went out there on their own, and when they ran into a little bit of resistance, they said, okay, you can stay, but we're going to make you slaves. Well, that's not what God said. So God is preparing to punish them, and here it comes. So the angel of the Lord, and the last time the angel of the Lord appeared was in Joshua, when Joshua ran into the guy with the sword. Remember, Joshua asked him, who are you for, us or the enemy? And the angel said, nobody. I'm in charge of God's armies. The angel of the Lord comes back. And he said, I brought you up out of Egypt, so he's speaking for God, and led you into the land I swore to give your ancestors. God said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, which they already did, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me, so here it comes. Why have you done this? And I have also said, I will not drive them out before you. They will become traps for you, and their gods will become a snare to you, which they do. Verse 4, when the angel of the Lord had spoken these things to the Israelites, the people wept aloud. Of course they cried because they know what's coming. And they called this place Bochum, which means the weepers. So they're crying, so they know they're going to get punished. Disobedience and defeat. So we're having another flashback here in verse 6. So we're flashing back to Joshua chapter 24. This is this is after Joshua gives his speech, his farewell speech. After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance, where they each got their own cut. The people served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua. As long as Joshua was there, they were obedient. During their lifetime, and of the elders who outlived him and who had seen all the great things the Lord had done for Israel. Verse 8. Joshua son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at age 110, and they buried him in the land of his inheritance, Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim in the Mount Gash. And that takes us back to Joshua 24. Verse 10. After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, so after the second generation all died off, another generation, the third generation, grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. And as Christy said, they don't know what God did for them because the parents and the grandparents didn't tell them the stories like they were supposed to. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. and serve the Baals. So we know the god of the Baals. That is the primary god of the Canaanites. He's the god of thunder and of fertility and of crops. So they're starting to worship Baal. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the people around them because they didn't get rid of them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him. They served Baal and the Ashtoreths. Now, Ashtoreth, that's like Baal's wife. So there's like 1 and 2. And she's the goddess, the mother goddess of love, war, and of fertility, of course. Now, God hated their worship because it included temple prostitution, which was, I guess, like it's a way to raise money for the temple, the pagan temples, and child sacrifice. And they're also really nasty in war. They didn't pay attention to any of the conventions of war. So God sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, who they were no longer able to resist. God didn't help them defend the land. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn them. They were in great distress. Now God tells us way back in Deuteronomy, he told Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 7, do not intermarry with them, do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods, and the Lord's anger will burn against you and quickly destroy you. God told them way back in Deuteronomy, that they shouldn't do this, and yet they did. Then the Lord set up judges, and as we said earlier, these aren't legal judges, they're just leaders, judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. So these are the guys that helped the Israelites repent. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshiped them. The judges were there, it worked temporarily, then they sinned. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's command, and they followed the Canaanite religion because it looked like fun, because they could do whatever they wanted to. No rules. No, I won't go there. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as that judge lived. As soon as the judge died, they went back to sinning, and they went over and over again, rinse and repeat. For the Lord relented because of their groaning. Now, this is interesting here. This word, the Hebrew word for groaning, was only used twice in the Old Testament. The first time it was used was when the Israelites were in Egypt, and they were groaning because they were under slavery of the Egyptians. So it's interesting the way that the Bible uses certain words in certain instances, and it's very applicable. Verse 19, but when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt. So not only did they sin again, but their sin was even worse than before. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. And as we saw before, this is a cycle that they've repeated ever since they left Egypt. They and in Judges, it's the way it works is not only do they get punished, they get taken over. So they rebel against God, they get overrun by their enemies, God gives them a judge to deliver the Israelites, they remain loyal to God while the judge is still alive, judge dies, and then they sin again. So we're going to see this over and over again, and hopefully it's going to be interesting, we'll find out.
I'm not sure what verse in Judges it is, but each man did right in his own eyes.
Yes, yep. That's later in Judges, and
Applicable now.
It is, because we talked about this in Sunday school last week, how now there's no universal truth. What a lot of people like to say is, well, that's your truth. And it's like, no, there's no my truth, there's no your truth, there's only one truth. And we can say that because we know the Bible. That's our one truth. But so many people don't have that grounding. So we've got to make sure that we start getting this idea across to people, otherwise we're going to keep having these problems we have. Verse 20. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and said, because this nation has violated the covenant I ordained for their ancestors and has not listened to me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. Because Joshua didn't wipe out everybody, right? We know that. I will use them to test Israel and see whether they keep the way of the Lord and walk in it as their ancestors did. The Lord had allowed these nations to remain. He did not drive them out at once by giving them into the hands of Joshua. So as we make our way through Judges, we're going to see this over and over again. We're going to see different types of judges come with different skills, and we're going to see how they get through things. So we're in for a tough ride, but it's not something we haven't
And it
seen
keeps
before.
getting worse.
They do.
How many chapters in Judges?
Judges has 21 chapters.
Well, that would
So-
take us till summer.
Well, yeah, because we're going to have a couple breaks. Next week we won't have Bible 101 because I have to go to a meeting at the village, so we won't have class next week. And then I think the 12th and the 19th, Chris Longshore is going to give us. She's going to take 2 Wednesdays to teach a class in speaking and praying with the Holy Spirit. So that's going to be pretty interesting too. So we're going to have a couple breaks. So Judges will take us into the summer. And
I have a
it's going to be
question.
interesting. Yes, ma'am.
Timeline goes back to 1350, but that is BC. How did they keep track of time? This timeline was made after BC, obviously.
Yeah.
So how did they keep track of time before Christ?
Well, you mean in terms of days?
Yeah, no, how did they, we count the years after Christ.
Yeah.
So we're at 2021. But before that, what did they base their time on? Does anybody know?
Well, if you look at the timeline, it ties it to verses, and they actually had theologians go back to these verses and try to pinpoint what each verse said.
Yeah, I know how.
Okay.
I know that how they figured that out, not after the fact, but at the time these people lived. How did they count time?
I don't know.
It's a good question.
I don't know if it was a 360-day year or how they did it. I don't know.
Somebody Google it.
But when I looked at that, I thought, they didn't know it was 1350, or they didn't know it was 1300.
Right.
They didn't
Right.
know. They didn't know. What as far as the way we count time.
Yeah.
It
you're-
didn't make any difference at that time. It was just a continuum maybe, and then later on put years to it.
Yeah, they like Karen says, they probably didn't care. So it's something that we wanted to do. We wanted to pinpoint, well, when did this happen? So they went back and tracked it. I think that back in the day, they were more worried about the planting cycle, the harvesting cycle. I think that's what made sense to them. They didn't care if it was 10 years.
They didn't have an event to base time to start or stop or whatever. Huh?
I don't think so. I think they tied everything to the harvest and planting, Jeanette. That'd be my best guess.
Like 1 year and then another year and then another year, but we don't count them, huh?
Yeah. And we know that when God gave them the law, he kind of laid out every 7 years,
Right.
you're supposed to let the land rest, but they didn't pay attention to that. So God gave them the measurements of time, and he gave them the process, but they just didn't follow it. So
Yeah, back then, Jeanette, you could have told them you were 20.
Well, not even I would have believed that.
Well, after a while, they would kind of figure it out that you weren't 20, but maybe for the longest time.
So could it be that maybe these, let's say Joshua did not really live that long in years, but in their mind he was that old?
It could be. It
Huh.
could be.
Interesting.
And it probably wasn't determined how old he was. Well, no.
It
Because
doesn't.
the Bible tells us.
Right.
So somebody was tracking time for that purpose at least,
Right, you could go year by
Yeah.
year by year
Yeah.
by year.
based on what occurred at
Right,
the time.
right.
Interesting.
Yeah, because we know Joshua was 30 when they left Egypt, and we know that they were in the desert for 40 years. So that's how they kind of figured out how old he was.
Yeah, he didn't take over till he was like 80 or 90.
Yeah, around there, yeah.
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 I
So,
think he would have been 40 when he left Egypt. It said he was 110. And
okay.
here it says that he was in the desert for 40 years and he lived 30 years in promised land before the judges. That's 70. And if he lived to be 110, that would be 40 more,
There you go.
or whatever a year is.
Yeah. 40, okay, so 110 of their years. Okay, I'll buy that.
Growing seasons.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
based on the growing season.
Good questions. Anything else?
Judges is probably not a well-read book, but there's a lot of heavy stuff in there.
And it's a good book for lessons, I think. I think we're going to learn a lot about how to deal with the current world in Judges, because I think there's going to be a lot of parallels. But we'll find out. We'll find out. All right. Anything else? If not, I'll see you guys in 2 weeks, because I'll be at a very interesting meeting next week, I'm sure. What's going on is the village has applied for a grant. I think it's a $10,000 grant that's going to help us develop community events. So next week what we're going to do is we're going to kind of brainstorm what are some of the things that would be good for the community. And a lot of things we're starting to do already, like the community garden is one thing. Christy was thinking about a splash pad, if we had a splash pad in College Park, right? So the kids can go have some place to cool off. So we're going to get together and try to figure out what would be good to get the community to work together. So that's what next Wednesday's meeting is all about.